The Cetacean Acoustic Trend Tracking Project, CATT, uses Chelonia FPOD passive acoustic monitoring devices to track dolphin and porpoise population and distribution trends around the UK coastline. Hello, this is part 2 of our basics video for the CATT users who are not familiar with FPOD, and we're going through the basics here. We started with taking the SD card out of the pod and creating the FP1 and FP3 files. In part 2 here, we're going to start delving into the file and seeing what we can see in there. So I'm going to open the FPOD software. I am going to open a file set, which means it will open a set of 1 FP1 and 3 FP3s. So I'll do that and then we'll see exactly what that is. I'm going to use the St. Martin's file, which is 181 days long, so it's a big file. There we are, 1 FP1 and 3 FP3s. Now the FP1 in the bottom row there is the raw data. That's everything the FPOD heard. And for that one, F1, we're looking at the frequency in that window. The next 3 are FP3s, so this is the output of the train detection algorithm. So this is everything that the algorithm extracted and classified as either other cetacean, which would be a dolphin for us, NBHF, which would be a porpoise for us, or sonar, which would be a boat. I'm going to fit the whole time range on the screen and show from start, and it will load that file. As we have seen in other files and in other videos, this is the raw data, the FP1. We're looking at frequency here. This is 181 days. This is 6 months long, but even so, we can see a tidal pattern there as the frequency increases and decreases. This particular deployment was at about 60 meters on an acoustic release, so it's close to the seabed. So I would expect that noise possibly to be sediment transportation. It's more likely we would pick that up than the surface noise. We get bubbles as well if we're hanging from a buoy somewhere near the surface. These 3 are all the FP3 train detection algorithm outputs. So in here, the orange and the purple relate to the other cetaceans, which are dolphins for us, and NBHF, which are porpoises for us. So you see the height of the line is the number of clicks. So we can already see a sort of a trend here with increasing numbers of clicks through this file. Now the file starts at the beginning here around the middle of June and runs right through to around the middle of December. So we're seeing more activity there, particularly with the dolphins as we get into November and December. This line is showing us the quality of those classifications. That's how confident the classifier was that that classification was correct. We have 3 levels. I've switched off low there. We tend to work with the medium and high. The lows tend to just sit with little green lines on top of the yellow, and that's always a reassuring sign. It shows that they probably are good classifications, but because they're either a bit further away or a bit quieter, the software didn't have that many features to say I'm confident that that was a dolphin or a porpoise. This is the click rates. At that sort of level, we can't see too many. So when we zoom in a bit more, we'll see the click trains in a lot more detail. What I will do initially, I'll leave these on, and I will go into about maybe 20 milliseconds, and that will show me a different view. From the start, we're still looking at the same things here. This is the raw data. And then these 3 will be the detections. Now when I click show next screen, it won't simply move to the next bit of the screen. It will go to the next screen that has that many clicks in it, or in each pixel. So as I change that number and I change the time scale, I can select different levels of click train density. So if I show next screen, we will move to a screen that has a click train in it. Now I can see from the raw data here that was fairly quiet. There wasn't much else going on around there. If I hover over it, I can see that was 9:34 in the morning. The purple there is telling me it was porpoise. It's quite confident in those detections, and they are quite low click rates. Now a few things I can do to investigate these further. If I hover over them and hit the down arrow, it will zoom in and then recenter. So again, I'll hover over them and hit the down arrow, it will zoom in on them. I can zoom in a long way. and I can start seeing some characteristics. If I hit the up arrow, it will center and zoom out again. These lines here, the height of them is giving me the sound pressure level, which is like the amplitude, the loudness of it. Now that they're fairly low, if I want to give that a slightly different scale, that's going up to about 500 SPL on there. These are only going up to less than 100. If I hover over that window and I hit the F5 button, it will change that scale. So that's now going up to 120 SPL. So these are now filling far more of that screen. If I hit the F6, it will do the reverse. You'll see these numbers go up from 120 at the top there to 240, and then these lines will go down. I can do that on this screen as well. So if I hover over that one and F5, we'll stretch that out and stretch it back on F6. And I can do the same on the click rates here. So at the moment that's going up to 90, but if I hit the F5, it will go up to 40 and I'll see them lift up, and F6 will take them down again. So F5 and F6 zoom in and out on the scale on the side of the screen, but it will do it over the channel that you're hovering over. That will allow us to zoom in and out. I'll leave it there and show next screen again, and that will jump forward. So I'm seeing more porpoise detections there. You can see as I zoomed in and out there, it's actually changed. We're down to 2 milliseconds here. So this is a very short amount of time we're looking at, and that whole screen is about 6 seconds. The 2 milliseconds refers to each pixel within that screen. So if I hit the up arrow a few times, we'll get to a point where I can see these vertical white lines. Now that's showing me a minute. So if I go out one more, so I've got a 4K screen here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see 5 or 6 minutes on there, so I can see quite a big section of the screen, and that's helpful if I'm looking for an encounter, if I want to see the animals approach, move through and move away again. Another useful tool, which is over on that button there, but I generally use F4, that will bypass all my filters. At the moment, I'm not looking at the lows or the echoes or the unclassified. If I hit F4, it will bypass all the filters and show me everything. Actually, there's very little change there. You can see there is a detection there that was low quality for green. If I hit F4 again, that will disappear and come back again, but there really wasn't much in there that we were missing. So I'm going to hover over there again and hit the down arrow to zoom in on these little up sweeps there. And then I'm going to hit show next screen again. And there's more porpoise, quite low click rate, quite level. And we can click through a file for quite a while like this, just looking for the interesting things. So that's a bit more interesting. I'm going to hit the down arrow while I'm centered on that. And I'm going to hit F6 to bring that down a bit. So that's a little loop there, peaking around 100. It's got a nice profile there on the sound pressure level. That suggests that that was just a short call. When we see the amplitude ramping up like that and ramping down like that, that suggests that we're hearing the whole thing from beginning to end. What we will often see with the foraging or echolocation calls is one long click train that they're sweeping around in front of them, and we'll just catch a snapshot of it in one place and a snapshot of it in the other place, and as they move that beam away there'll be large gaps. When we find that, we get sharp edges on the amplitude here, but a nice ramp up, ramp down like that suggests that was an isolated little call. So I'm going to go back to where I was, 20 milliseconds, and I'm going to show next screen again, start moving through here. Now that's getting a bit more interesting, so I'm going to zoom in on that. We're still looking at porpoises because they're purple. I'm going to come in on that. I'm going to F6 to bring that down a bit more. So there's some calls in there. Now one thing we can do, if we right click on there and select this file for action, what I can do is actually pay back those clicks. So we'll see what happens. Oh, that's really nice. It really captures people's imagination. But what we're hearing there isn't anything like the noise the porpoise was making. The porpoise is clicking at 120 kilohertz. Humans can hear generally up to about 15 or 16 kilohertz. If you're very young, a bit higher, I can probably hear up to 13 or 14 kilohertz. So this is maybe 10 times higher in frequency than humans can hear. The change in pitch that we are playing back there represents this change in click rate. So that sweep there starts at about 116 clicks per second, goes up to 160, levels out, and then goes up to about 230. So we're representing a change in click rate as a change in pitch. That's quite interesting, I think, because the dolphins and the porpoises click at all sorts of different click rates. We think there is quite a lot of information in that click rate, as well as in the frequency and the tonality and the amplitude. It's an interesting one to track. This is possibly an example. If we look in the raw data there, we can see that is probably one long continuous click train, but the animal swung it about there. That section with the gap was maybe when it wasn't looking at the pod. These beams of click trains are highly directional. Porpoises don't actually whistle, but if we were looking at dolphins, the whistle that a dolphin makes can be heard by humans, and it's an omnidirectional call, goes out to the whole pod. These click train beams are highly directional, so they can aim them at individual animals. So they use them for communication amongst other things, but they are very specific, so they are used in quite different ways to the whistles. I'm going to go back out to 20 milliseconds, show next screen again, and we'll carry on moving through here. So more porpoises, some sort of low click rates there. That may well be some navigation at the very low click rates. They don't go much below 4 or 5. That sort of click rate, given the return time of sound in water traveling at 1500 meters a second, the animal will be looking 180 meters ahead. Moving on again, there's some more porpoise activity, more porpoise. There's that looks like, again, navigation, possibly foraging beams swinging around, and we're just catching glimpses of it as they swing that beam around. There's a very high one there, which is maxed out, so I'm going to have to hit F6 to bring that back down into range. You can see there is a tiny little call there, which is a bit unusual. I'm going to show the next screen again, and we'll keep moving through here. Now what I can do, because there are a lot of calls in here, earlier I marked a few that looked interesting to me. So at the moment, if we come down here, we can see we are looking at marked trains included with all the other calls. If I click that again, I can exclude my marked calls, or I can look for only my marked calls. So if I have it on that and I show next screen, it'll take me to some that I've marked before, and you can see they're marked because they've got lines here. These look a lot more interesting. That's some quite complex click rate calls in there. So if I play these, the click rates are quite high there. They're up to close to 600 clicks per second. The blue line here is the reflection that we're getting. That may be from the surface or the seabed, but that noise isn't made by the animal. This is the noise made by the animal, and that's the reflection of it. When we look at the raw data down here, we can see that these ramp up nicely at the edges, suggesting that we are getting a whole call there rather than chopping off bits in the middle. The other nice thing that comes through here is this nice wavy line that doesn't exactly match the click rate line. Probably the beam sweeping up and down past the F-pod in time with the animal's tail beats. So we can often work out how fast the animal was traveling, or at least what its tail beat rate was, by these fluctuating lines which represent the head bobbing up and down in time with the tail beats as they're swimming along. That's a nice little sequence there, and we'll move on to the next screen. So there's some more porpoise calls. Again, we've got nice clean edges here, suggesting this is some sort of communications, shows social activity, and we are capturing most of it. You can see the gap in there. That probably is where the animal moved around and the F-pod missed a bit. In the raw data, you can see it is continuous, but the classifier just didn't have enough of that bit in the middle there to work that out and say that's definitely a porpoise. These white dots show where the loudest cycle is. when we hover over these, we can see these are predominantly, this is, if I zoom in there a bit actually so we can see better, each one of those lines is a click. That's the raw data, and this is what the train detection algorithm picked out. The white line is where the loudest cycle in the waveform of each individual click was, and that can be useful for species classification. You can see these are often around the middle. That tends to be the case in the files that I've seen from harbour porpoises around the UK. In the dolphins, and we might see some later, they tend to be more near the beginning. We can get other little bits of information from these little signs. There's lots of other things we can switch on and off in this software to show us slightly different views. There's an interesting half minute there of various communication going on. I'll just hit F4 and bypass the filters. We can see there is a few other bits in there. We can see some of the green calls, but we caught most of that. There's a little bit at the beginning there, so maybe just a navigation click. Then there was some communication. Let's move on to the next screen. I can edge along by hitting the right arrow button. Look for the beginning and the end of the encounter. And likewise, if I go back the other way, I can see the beginning and the end using the right and left arrow buttons. Now I just spotted something quite interesting there. This here, if I'm going to hit F6 to bring that down a bit, now we can see that there's a series of pulses. The yellow is telling me it's right around 70 kilohertz, and that is a fish tag. I'm not the least bit surprised to see that, because we did manage to get an FPOD off St Martin's by sharing a site with the University of Plymouth Fish Intel team. So it was their acoustic release, and they had recorders on there that were picking up fish tags that they had attached to crayfish that they'd released around this area. And this is one of the reasons that the CATT project did very well in the first year. It turns out we can pick up these fish tags very easily. So the Fish Intel project was quite happy to share its sites with us. So that was a nice little accident. Now, I think that this was discovered by the University of Swansea. They found these little barcodes in their data, and they worked out that they're actually fish tags. So we're quite grateful to them for giving us that little piece of information. So I'll show next screen, and I've left the F4 on there, so I'm going to take that off, and you'll see all these go back. There we go. So there's another fish tag we stumbled across. I'll show next screen, and it will take me to more porpoise activity. And again, that looks quite interesting. And that looks like social activity. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to F5 that to bring it up a bit so we can see it a bit better. So it does look like they're a nice. I'm going to F6 to bring it down. It looks like we've captured the whole call there. So these look like repeated calls. It looks like we got the whole thing, and it's just repeating that over and over again, which is quite an interesting thing at fairly low click rates too. We do have someone working on social communication, looking at these click rates in these files and these click trains. It's fascinating stuff. Let me show the next screen. We'll move on a bit. There's a bit more isolated, possibly porpoise communication there. If I move on. Okay, so now these have turned orange. So now we're getting into some dolphin communication. And I'm going to hit F4 again there to see what, and yeah, there's a lot more activity in there than the classifier could pick up. So this may mean that these animals were a little way off and that they were sort of approaching. So I'm going to edge through that file, see what I can find. So there's some big calls there. I'm going to F6 to bring those down a bit and zoom in on them. So yes, so what we can see here, these aren't very loud, but if we look down here, it looks very, very messy and cluttered. So I'm going to zoom in on those to see what we can see. And what we're looking at there is we can really see in some detail what the classifier does. These longer lines there, you can see that one has been picked out by the classifier as a dolphin click, whereas these ones haven't. These are probably the reflections and refractions and harmonics and all the various other clicks that the dolphin is listening to. So the FPOD hears all of those as well. And one of the very clever things it does is decide which clicks are coming from the dolphin and which clicks are the reflections and refractions. And you can see quite well on there, there are quite a few reflections and refractions that have come through, but the FPOD has decided exactly which ones come from the dolphin and translates that into the click trains that we actually study. And let me come back up again. Come back out there, show next screen, keep moving through this file. Now there's some more dolphin. We're in dolphin encounters again now. These click rates are up above 600. They're quite high click rates. They're quite flat and level. If it were a feeding buzz, I would expect to see it start slow and sweep up as they close in on their prey. But there is quite a complex call. So we can see in the raw data here, there's lots of different frequencies, lots of different amplitudes. The software has picked out the clicks it thinks are in that click train, and this is what we've ended up with. I'm going to just F5 that to bring it up a bit, and we'll play that back and see what it sounds like. Do get some strange sounds coming out of these. It's quite mammalian. Some of them sound almost like chimps or gibbons hooping up in the trees. And it does add a whole new dimension to it when you can play back these sounds. So that's dolphins. That may represent some kind of feeding behavior or social behavior, or a combination of both. It would be lovely to know what you think. A similar thing there. That does look like isolated social communication. So we're back into some porpoise activity now. So there is quite a complex range of calls. If I hit F4, you can see we've captured all of it there. Right? It must be quite close. Some of these are quite long, 15, 16, 17, up to 25 cycles. So there's some quite long clicks in there. Fairly consistent click rate at a fairly high level. So this may well be social communication. We've got the wavy lines along here, which may suggest the tail beats. Got nice smooth rounded edges at the beginning and end. We may well be getting most of the call there. Maybe that porpoise may have been foraging or moving towards the pod without too much movement, so we get all of it. This nice quiet environment here. You can see that there isn't much else happening. I look at the time, I can see this is about 20 to 5 in the afternoon. I'm in the middle of November. So by that time, the seas may well have been quite rough. It is quite interesting to look at the weather forecasts, see when the storms hit. Next screen. Again, dolphin activity there, some interesting shapes and patterns. A whole range of frequencies identified by the colors. The yellow would be around that 70 kilohertz. The blue and purple here might be 120, 130 kilohertz. The red ones and orange ones would be much more closer to maybe 30 kilohertz. So a whole range of frequencies and tonalities and amplitudes, as well as the changing click rate, could be used to pass on information. More porpoise looks like social activity. Really interesting shapes coming out of the Isles of Scilly. It would be lovely to get more monitoring out there and have another look. Let me play that back. We do have a PhD student just starting this month, a 4-year PhD, looking into some of these social calls, seeing if there is a chance of classifying them in any great detail, looking for the repetitions and patterns, and see if we can start to work out what might be happening here, linking it to the environment and anything else that may have been going on. But it's a big task. It's going to be fascinating to see what comes out of that. We can see from the little white bar here, we're getting close to the end of the file. It was 181 days, so we've clicked through it quite quickly. We are just looking at the marked trains, so these are the ones I picked out to look at particularly. Just about at the end of the file, yes, and no more clicks. So that's how we look at a file. One more really useful feature, if we see something and we click past it, I'm going to hit Control Z now a few times, and it will just step back through all the clicks I've done. All the zooming in and zooming out and moving along. I can go quite a long way back through that. So Control Z is a really useful one for working back through everything you've done to find out the bits and pieces that you wanted to save. Okay, we'll leave it there for that one. The next video will be looking at the graphing, the analyzing, and the exporting, which is quite useful for sharing your data. But for this one, we'll leave it there. Thank you. So to summarize, we opened a file set, we changed the timescale, we zoomed using the up and down arrows, we used F5 and F6 to change the parameter scales, we used F4 to bypass the filters, we played back click trains, we used the right and left arrows on the timeline, we looked at fish tags and social calls. All of the data gathered on the CATT project is open source at the Figshare Plus open repository in the project called CATT. The software we use to analyze the data is available at the chelonia.co.uk website called fpod.exe. RDUK was established to set up the CATT project on behalf of Chelonia.